everybody. Welcome back. If you missed me before, my name is Ashley Johnson. I'm an integrated marketing communications major here, and I'm specializing in magazines. I'm one of Doc's students. I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon. Naomi S. Barron is Executive Director of the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning, and Professor of Linguistics in the Department of World Languages and Cultures at American University in Washington, D.C. She is the author of 8 books, including Words on Screen, The Fate of Reading in a Digital World, Always On, Language in an Online and Mobile World, and Computer Languages, A Guide for the Perplexed. Always On was the winner of the 2008 English Speaking Union's Duke of Edinburgh English Language Award Competition. It's a mouthful. Professor Barron's research focuses on the effects of technology on language, social interaction, and learning. Here to talk about millennials in print, Ms. Barron.
To begin with a couple of thanks. Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you, where is Jim? Thank you, Jim Elliott, and thank you, Samir. And thank all of you for coming in from the sunshine. What a show of support. Now, as Monty Python used to say, for something completely different. As Ashley explained, I do research on something that is very different from what the people here gather a lot of information on. Namely, I do research on how people use digital media, both for communicating in spoken language and in written language and such things as email and instant messaging and texting. But for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing on the question of how people read when they're reading on digital devices as opposed to reading in print. I do not claim to be an expert on magazines, but I hope by the time I'm finished, some of the things that I have to say will resonate with you in ways we can have some good conversation together. So let's think for a moment about reading. In fact, let's think about reading in a number of different contexts, because what I'm really interested in is not judging is print good, is print bad, is digital good or bad, but how are the containers, as they're called, perhaps changing what it means to read and what might the consequences of this be. So who knows what the picture is a picture of? Library of Congress, you got it. I spent much of my youth sitting there. I had permission, believe me. These days in my youth, I would not be allowed there. This is a contemporary picture of an image of reading, again from Washington, from what's called the Petworth Reading Room. I read about this in one of the local publications, I think Washington Post magazine. And the place is lined with books that are color coordinated, that looks good, and there are drinks named after various authors. Well, that's a notion of thinking about reading. A way in which the way we think about reading is dramatically changing is the growing number of platforms on which there are shorter amounts of text being put forth, being written, being condensed to, and so forth. So one of the newest movements is called flash fiction. You get 1,000 words or less, or should it be fewer? They called it less, so there we go. Twitter stories. There's a new tool called InstaRead, so I just quote a little bit from it. With InstaRead, you get a short 15-minute summary of any book, and it's all well-written, and it's available on all these different media. Why do you want a 15-minute summary? Maybe so you can look as if you've read the book, although you haven't, as if you've acquired the book, although you haven't, which brings us to another fairly new tool called BookRags. I'm not sure why they named it that, which is a tool for studying or teaching literature. OMG, does this mean that the people who are teaching the books have not read the books, but they're reading the 9-page chapter summaries with quotes, character analyses, analysis, themes, and so forth, in this case from a book by Carl Sandburg about Abe Lincoln. Now let's turn to thinking about technology, and in particular thinking about technology and reading. Some of my earlier research is on relationships between spoken and written language, and for that I had to look at the origins of writing in many different parts of the world and think about the relationship between writing and reading. What we know is that writing is a technology, and print is a technology, And to read, you have to use different technologies. And sometimes those technologies have been produced by hand, as in manuscripts, sometimes produced by machines of the old-fashioned sort, take your favorite press. And sometimes it has to do with the digital technologies. But they're all technologies, and over time there's no question that evolving technologies have changed the notion of what it means to write and to read. In digital times, there is also no question that digital technologies are reshaping us, not simply in terms of how we read, and that's what I'll be getting to for most of my presentation, but they're reshaping who we are as individuals and who we are as social beings. If you go back to the origin of computers, computers were invented not so we could all have iPhones or smartwatches, but so that we could improve the delivery of ballistic missiles and even cannonballs. That's an awful lot of the way in which technology has developed. These days, we use computers very heavily for big data, and that's terrific. But one of the results of that is we change our own notions of the things that we have to know how to do ourselves. In the case of big data, we have to be able to wrap our arms around it, we have to be able to calculate, and also change our notions of what we want to have in our heads as opposed to leave to the internet to find for us, or to allow us to find on it. And in the article that I have on Amplify, I talk a little bit more about that. Take mobile phones, asking how is digital technologies, are they reshaping us individually and socially? It's wonderful that we can have communication on demand. I just called my husband back in Washington. That was great. I have had international calls on my cell phone. That is great. Expensive sometimes, but great. But it is also the case, without a doubt, that the mobile technologies of telephony are now radically changing our notions of social responsibility to always be available, and absolutely changing the notion of what a social space is in terms of disruption from use of the mobile phone, whether we are initiating the call or receiving it, or the text or receiving it. Take online social networking. It's highly useful, and including for marketing, as we're hearing increasingly at this conference. But it is also the case that people feel incredibly pressured, now I'm talking about as individuals, to always be available to the public, to always be on, to never stop posting. And one of the things that's abundantly clear, if you are anywhere around universities or you have high school or college-age students in your family, you know the level of stress upon them, in part because they feel they always have to be on, is not for their health benefits. Then there's the issue of the 24/7 news cycle, which we know is affecting magazines, but it is also affecting what it means for us as individuals to consume news, because there's always something new coming, and there's much less time to sit and think, what's really important, as opposed to what just hit my Twitter feed. Today, what I want to talk about, as I intimated, was whether digital technologies are reshaping the notion of what it means to read. And because I have lived for all of my professional life in a university context, I have a lot of access to 18 to 24-year-olds, and have over time. And I know the kinds of things I assign them to read. I know what they read, what they don't read, and I have some anecdotal sense of what they like and what they don't like with regard to reading and reading platforms. But I thought it was going to be important to actually find out, and you'll find out in a moment how I did that. Then, because people here are in the publishing business one way or another, I have some thoughts about the effects of digital reading on the publishing business. I'll give you my crystal ball reading of where I think things are going, at least in the realm that I have more familiarity with, and then just a couple of thoughts about maybe millennials in magazines. So, in terms of the research that I've done, I first reviewed everybody else's research, and then I'll tell you about my research. You can forget about this slide because then I go piece by piece on it. There have been a fair number of studies that have been done in the last 6 or 7 years, largely by psychologists. Some have been done in the United States, some in Germany, some in Israel, some in Austria, and a couple of other places, that all tend to run the same kind of tests and come up with the same kinds of results. And the tests are what I like to refer to as SAT, or I guess in this part of the country I should say ACT, verbal tests. You read a passage, and then you answer the questions on it. And overwhelmingly, the responses to those tests, when you read on a digital platform as opposed to reading in print, digital platform typically has been a laptop computer, though not exclusively. There's a little variation from experiment to experiment. Overwhelmingly, the results are the same. Doesn't matter what platform you read on. So should we all say, aha, digital's just the same as print. There's no reason to worry about the container. It's the content that matters. Well, please, not so fast. That kind of study is probably not telling us anything about how, in real life, people are doing their reading. So one of the studies happened to be done in Israel. After running the standard study saying you have 5 minutes or whatever it is to read the passage on the two platforms, answer the questions, the study then said, take as much time as you want on either of these passages, and when you're good and ready, answer the questions. People took less time reading digitally and did worse on the comprehension test, which should not be surprising given the ways in which we tend to use digital devices. We scroll, we page, we search, and we don't do a lot of continuous reading without disruption. A couple of other studies have been done coming out of a European project from the European Union called COST, which stands for Cooperation in Science and Technology. There have actually been 2 COST projects on comparing the ways we read digitally versus the way we read in print. They were largely essay studies that asked people to just write about what they thought about reading in print or reading on a digital device. Similarly, to write about what they thought about writing on those 2 platforms. And it was because their anecdotal responses, they were not quantified, were similar enough to the results that I'll be sharing with you. I won't share those in particular. But what I will share is the continuous, resounding number of data points we have that cost is driving student decisions on how to read. So one of the things to keep in mind is a recent study done by NESI, which is the National Survey of Student Engagement, was done in fall 2015 with college seniors. They do another one for freshmen, but this is the seniors. 40% of the college seniors, this is a very well-conducted random sample type study, 40% of the college seniors said very often or often they don't buy the required materials because of cost. And you may say, well, maybe they got them in the library, or maybe they shared them, or maybe they rented them, or maybe they didn't procure them at all. And that is what is happening increasingly on college campuses. We just went away. It just stopped us. That was not a good thing to do. It's my fault. But you saved me. This is one of your special talents, I'm sure. Okay, now my research. I looked at university students, mostly undergraduates, a few graduate students, in 5 different countries. You see the list up there, so I won't read it to you. I had a little over 400 subjects, with a mean age of around 21 years. I asked a series of questions using SurveyMonkey, where people had access to computers. In Japan, they tend to have so-called keitai or mobile phones. They didn't all have computers, so we did it by hand there. Yes, we translated things into Japanese and into Slovak and into German, and then had to translate the answers back again into English so I could code them. 3 kinds of questions. The first are what I call choice questions. The second are what I call like most, like least. I'll explain these all in a moment. And then I gave people an opportunity to just add any other comments they wanted. So for the choice questions, I would ask questions such as, what % of your schoolwork, your academic reading, do you do in hard copy, that is in print? What % of your schoolwork do you do on a digital screen? And then I would ask the same question about reading for pleasure, okay? When you're reading in hard copy or in print, how often do you multitask? What about when you're reading on a digital screen? And those were easy to score because you can just get the results, put them into Excel, and do your percentages. The like most, like least questions were equally interesting, though, because people could say anything they wanted, what was on their minds. I asked 4 questions. What was the one thing you like most about reading in print? What is the one thing you like least about reading in print? Similarly, for reading in a digital platform, what is the one thing you like most? What is the one thing you like least? So you get all these thousands of responses, and then you have to code them. I won't go through the details of the coding, but I'll just show you an example of some of the categories we came up with. We actually came up with 50-some categories. This is just a shortened version. So I wanted to think about, is there an aesthetic quality? And people talked an awful lot about the touch of paper, the feel of paper. They talked about the smell of paper far more often than I thought 18 to 24 or 26-year-olds knew how to talk about. They talked a lot about some other physical characteristics. We'll get to those in a moment. Cognitive characteristics that turned out, I teach, right, to be particularly important to me. They talked about access issues, convenience issues, and they talked about resources, ecological and monetary. All right, just some of the results that I think are interesting, but we'll get to the ones that I think are going to be most important for us. A fair number of comments on what people liked most about reading in hard copy were that I just enjoy it. I like the smell of paper. I like the feel that I'm actually reading. Reading digitally doesn't feel as if it's really reading to me. What do they like least about digital screen? It's not fun. I hate reading. So some of them were just, they didn't tell me what they hated. They just said, I hate doing it. Interestingly, there were only 1 or 2 comments out of those 429 subjects on what they liked most about reading digitally that had anything to do with emotions or aesthetics. That is, aesthetics seems to be a print issue. Text length. We know this anecdotally, but it was really nice to have some numbers to attach to it. When you're reading for schoolwork, and then I asked the same question about reading for pleasure, and the text is short, and then I asked about if the text is long, would you rather read hard copy or on a digital screen? For short stuff, and I didn't define what short does. At the beginning of the survey, I said, I'm not talking about tweets, I'm not talking about text, I'm talking about some longer stuff that would fill a screen at least, and then going on from there. It was all over the map, both by country and within country, as to where people preferred to read short texts. But for long texts, it was abundantly obvious. For schoolwork, 86% preferred reading in print. For pleasure, 78% preferred reading in print. The American data I collected in spring of 13, and I know the world has evolved. It's been almost 3 years. The other data were collected as we rolled along, semester by semester. But I'm not sure these data would change much. And what I want to say now, and then I'll say again in just a moment when I show you some other data, is this is the students talking to us. We haven't asked them before, what do they think about this? Scholastic actually has asked younger kids, and they think some things that K through 12 may not be purchasing in light of. We'll get to that in a moment too. Multitasking. When you're reading in hard copy or on a digital screen, how often are you multitasking? 2 different questions. I collapsed together the results for very often and sometimes, and I have the total responses on one side and the US on another. And the reason for doing that is in the US, because I asked if you're reading digitally, on which platform are you reading? Are you reading on a laptop? Are you reading on a phone, on a tablet, and so forth? And far, far, far more of the US subjects were doing almost all of their digital reading at that point on laptops. So multitasking, more people were multitasking when they were reading on a screen than in print. So it's 67% multitasking on a screen, 41% in print. The United States, 85% multitasking very often or sometimes when reading on a screen, because it's easy to have multiple screens up on a laptop, not so easy on a mobile phone, and only 26% in print. Concentration. Now we're getting to things that even matter more to me, although multitasking is linked, obviously, to the concentration issue. On which platform is it easiest to concentrate on your reading? And I didn't ask this about schoolwork versus pleasure. I just asked it one question. That is not to get distracted or multitask. 92% said, I concentrate best when I read in print. 92%. And then I gave you the statistics on what else they said. And this was across countries. Okay, in addition, in the like most, like least questions, at least 20% of the like least about reading digitally said something about distraction or lack of concentration among the American subjects. Of all the things they could like least about reading on a digital platform, 43% said, I'm distracted, I'm not concentrating. And as a person who teaches in the United States, this worries me deeply. Convenience. Okay, this is the flip side in so many ways. Among the most likely questions, 25% of all the what I like most about reading on a digital screen said something very explicitly about convenience. You say, okay, that's a quarter of them, but wait, there's more. Another 41% said something, and this just reflects the way we did the coding, that they liked most about reading digitally was they could access the materials easily, they liked the way the device functions, they could do word searches, they could find information, they could use the internet. So you put that together, and that's 2/3 of the people saying, what I like most about reading on a screen is something that's convenient, something that's functional. Similarly, 43% across all of the countries said what they liked least about reading in print was it wasn't convenient. All right, so there's a real notion of print doesn't let me do a word search. You mean I have to use an index and I have to write down what those page numbers were so I can go back and no, I'm not even going to bother doing that because I can do it so easily when I'm reading on screen. Cost. If cost were identical, and I'm quoting from the way I asked the question, in which medium would you prefer to do reading for schoolwork? And then I said, reading for pleasure. Reading for schoolwork, 87% said if cost were the same, I would prefer to read in print. And in Germany, it was up in the low 90s. I did see different statistics. Reading for pleasure, if cost were the same, 81% said they would prefer to read in hard copy. And other studies done by a company called Student Monitor, which looks at all kinds of behavior patterns of university students, found very similar kinds of results when you ask if cost is the same, which would you prefer? And the answer had been print, even given all those conveniences of reading digitally. Okay, similarly, people have other things to say about cost when it comes to those like most, like least questions. What do you like least about reading in print? It wastes resources. And sometimes they'd say monetary resources, and sometimes they'd say ecological resources, but wasted resources. And then in their added comments, they would say, print books cost more, and cash rules everything around me, including my own decisions. So cost is on their mind. American education is incredibly expensive. It is too expensive. And when you add on the cost of books, if you actually purchase them new, it becomes exorbitantly expensive. Okay. Some issues that I think are relevant from some of the things I've been finding for publishing in general, and then we'll get to magazines in a while. So the first is there's been a shift in the market share. You guys know the statistics even better than I do, so I won't read them all to you. I'll just say when Jeff Bezos introduced the Kindle in late 2007, and he said all the books are going to be $9.99, even though he was paying publishers more sometimes for those books. They were lost leaders. E-books gradually began to take off. And then the devices came in, and the Nook came in, and there had been other e-readers before, but now we've started to really get traction in the digital arena. Kobo came in and so forth. So depending upon whose statistics you look at, and I'm not here to fight stats, I just took a figure from a New York Times piece, there was this incredible, I won't give the number, just incredible rise in digital book sales between 2008 and 2012. Ebook share rose to around, again depending on whose figures you take, around 25% of the book market. Much of those sales were driven by these super bestsellers that often started digitally. Can you say 50 Shades of Grey? Okay. In more recent years, the digital sales have begun to reduce. Print is maybe, and I'm just going to talk about book print at the moment, making a comeback. And depending upon whose figures you look at, is it now 1% growth? Is it 3% growth? Is it 4%? It's somewhere around there. It's single-digit growth. And unless you have some blockbuster, and we'll get to that in a moment, in print, it's about the same numbers. And ebook share has probably, unless you say you haven't counted all those indie authors and therefore you have inaccurate statistics. I read the listservs, I know the issues. It's dropped somewhat, let's call it 20% of the market. Text length. And this is an issue for publishing because what's abundantly clear is, and I know a lot about academic publishers and a fair amount about trade publishers of books, is that publishers need to sell books to stay in business. It's no different from the magazine industry. And what a lot of publishers are saying is we're not going to publish the long books anymore. And those will be the exception rather than the rule. And they've started new kinds of series. And I always forget whether it's Chicago Shorts and Stanford Briefs or vice versa. But they all have these short versions that are monographs of maybe 30,000 up to 50,000 words. It's not the 80,000 to 100,000 word books that had been their staple for all these years. But if you think back to where, in this case, the novel began with Richardson's Clarissa, it was 1 million words. Anybody ever looked at what the paperback version of Clarissa looks like in a book? I mean, you can look online, you'll find it. But what happened very, very soon after those big first novels, that is, the novel was invented, first novels came out, is we started to see abridged versions. You saw abridged versions of Richardson's work. You saw even shorter versions of Richardson's work in the United States than you saw in England, as it was called at the time, before it got to be UK. You saw the growth of serialization, in part because it was expensive to buy a whole book, but you could buy the newspaper, you could buy the journal in which that segment came out. And then book reviews began to flourish in the second half of the 18th century. So you could read the book review, as many of us do now, and say, okay, I get the gist, thank you, I can now talk at my next cocktail party about the book. But no, I haven't read the book. Didn't say that. All right. Then there's the question of how many long books do readers finish? Now let me begin by saying there are many, many books that probably many of us in this room own that are print that we haven't even started. And I will not tell you when I bought some of those books. But one of the, perhaps, and there have been these academic substitutes. Anyone who teaches knows about how this works. So it used to be Cliff's Notes, and now it's Spark Notes, but now it's going to be Book Rags, maybe. But now that we have digital reading, we have ways of tracing what people are actually at least paginating. That doesn't say anything about whether you actually read it, but I don't know how many people actually paginate just to fool Kobo into saying, I finished The Goldfinch. But when you look at the data, and Kobo has put out some data, Amazon, to my knowledge, has not, but if anyone has found any, please let me know. They don't finish winners of National Book Awards. They don't finish the Man Booker Prize from the UK. They finish romance. Yeah. Okay, so what are the effects of the internet on the length of books? Well, it's really clear as you look at what's being encouraged, what's being started. It's serials, it's short stories. There's something that came out about 3 years ago called snack reads. You know, just in time. It's like you got a chance to eat the granola bar between doing X and doing Y. Well, maybe you have a chance to read something really short. And one of the things that's happening now is there are sites, and you probably know them, that are coming out. And they're called nice things like long reads. And they tell you how many words there are in the piece. I can deal with that. And now how many minutes it's supposed to take me to read. That I cannot deal with, because that's basically saying, if you take too long, maybe you're not a good reader after all. So I get stressed when I'm told how much time I have to read things. Okay, I won't talk about Sumley and Yahoo, that's old news. Okay, other things on text length. James Patterson, who cares incredibly about bookstores and libraries and gives money to help support them, has a new project coming out, I think it's slated to start this summer, called Book Shots. I guess it's like a shot drink. They're going to be really inexpensive novels, less than $5 a piece. You can read in one sitting, and they're intended for people who sort of gave up on reading, but now maybe they could read something, and they will be available in all formats. I learned about something new in France, and maybe somebody has seen one of these things. I just saw a picture online called, I guess you're going to pronounce it short, édition, which are short stories that are sold in vending machines. So instead of getting your Coke or instead of getting your bag of chips, you can get a short story. And there's 17 of these magazines in France, and there's one in San Francisco, and it's only in print. We'll see what happens. Okay, concentration issues, which I already gave you my data on. Think about the time you have wanted to read, oh, let's go for a magazine article online. So the image that you see on the right-hand side came from a URL link that I had in one of the listservs that I subscribed to a piece on, well, I was told the title was The Future of the Humanities, appearing in the Pacific Standard, Future of the Humanities: Reading, written by Michael Durda, who is a a book critic for the Washington Post, so I got interested. But I also got distracted. There's this big picture. Okay, it's books, I like books, but I wanted to get to the text. And then there are these, let's see if we can read it properly, I can't read it on this screen, discover a new way to get away. And it's, you could go to, what is this one, South Carolina or some such place. You know what I'm talking about. You start reading some text and then there's another ad, and then you read, and then there's the big ad. So I tried to get a print copy. Of course, my library didn't have one. It's published by the National Endowment for the Humanities, so I live in Washington, there in Washington. I called up NEH. I said, could you send me a copy of the actual magazine this came from, because it came from the magazine Humanities. The title is actually A Future of Reading. It's not The Future of the Humanities, but who's counting? And you can read it without interruption. So one of the challenges for concentration is not, are you being distracted by your new text coming in or you wanting to send a status update, but you're being distracted by the other stuff that advertising is putting out there in order to make it possible to mount this stuff digitally. Okay, other issues of concentration. I already spoke about the laptop issue being harder for concentration because you can have multiple screens out. One of my students, student in a place I was giving a guest lecture actually, no, first this way. I've had students point out to me in the last year, yeah, I read print, but I got my cell phone next to me. So it doesn't matter. I can get distracted just as easily because I have my source of distraction. It doesn't happen to be on exactly the same platform. We also know that the size of screens has been shrinking. We'll see whether the bigger iPads here and then tablets in Japan actually take off, or are they going to get smaller? People do read on their smartwatches. I've seen it happen. And not just individual words and not just sending texts. Novels. Yeah. And then I was giving a guest lecture, and one student said to me, you know, I really like to read. I like to read in print. But here's my problem now. When I'm reading in print, I keep waiting to get interrupted because that's what happens when I read on a screen. So I've gotten re-socialized as to what it means to read because so much of the reading that I do is on a digital device where I do get interrupted. Okay, just a little bit on speed reading. About every, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, there's this resurgent of interest, and we're just going to speed read, and it's all going to be fast, and it's all going to be good. And yes, there's some people who have been really good speed readers. Jack Kennedy apparently was a really good speed reader. Alan Bloom, the literary critic and autochthonous person unto himself at Yale, is a speed reader. Most of us are not good at it. There's a new application that came out a year or so ago called Spritz that is designed really to help you read a little faster. You don't have to read faster, but you could, but it gives you one word at a time, which I find to be very curious because everything we know about the reading research for decades shows that really good readers always read ahead, which you can't do if you're only seeing one word at a time. And in an interview that Frank Walden was on, he's the CEO of Spritz, I was very pleased to hear him say, you wouldn't really want to read classic literature or Shakespeare on Spritz. Yeah. Okay, things about convenience. Convenience is not going to go away as a consideration in what kind of medium we read in. I've already given you my data on that. We know that there has been a move. How much it's going to continue, I don't know, to bundle media for a single price or to lead you to do certain things in print and certain things on a screen, and we'll see where that goes. I don't know the answers. Different publications probably are having different successes with it. On the cost issue, I've shared my data with you. One of the changes that I know is happening in higher education, and it's probably going to start happening K through 12 if some of the bills proposed to Congress ever actually pass, is that increasingly we're going to be using open educational resources because the textbooks that are being sold are just too expensive. And whether they're being sold as print or whether they're being sold digitally, they're just too expensive. I am pleased to see that there is some comeback happening with independent bookstores. What I don't know, and it's overwhelmingly print. Some of them have experimented with making digital available, but I don't think that is the model that most of them are finding to be their source of profit. I don't know how much younger people are going to those bookstores. Effects of pricing on sales. We know that there was a change in the pricing of a lot of ebooks sold through Amazon, thanks to the fights it had with Hachette. And they have been settled, but the result is some of the books are higher. If you talk with people in the digital publishing industry, they will tell you the reason for the drop in sales is because of the rise in price. I'm not sure the prices have risen that much to make that much difference. In Europe, you have a different set of issues. In the EU, in principle, you follow the fixed price systems, the so-called Lang law coming out of France, which says you cannot discount a book more than 5% of its cost. Fixed pricing also exists in a lot of other countries. It does not exist in the United States. It does not exist in the UK. There is, however, in Europe, the issue of VAT, or value-added tax, which has been higher for digital than it has been for print. So by the time you have a slightly lower cost for digital, then you add the higher level tax, which sometimes is up to 20% and a little more, as opposed to 7 or 8% for print, as well as for concert tickets and newspapers, I think, and public transportation. I'm looking at you because you're the European I see sitting closest by. But that probably is going to end up changing, so prices of ebooks will fall. Will that make for more e-reading in continental Europe? We'll have to wait and see. Okay, cultural issues. I don't need to say much, except I firmly believe from all of my own experience in traveling abroad, as well as my colleagues that I work with, that there really is a different culture of reading in the United States, and I'm putting culture in quotation marks, than culture in at least a lot of Europe. And it will be interesting to see the extent to which convenience and cost drive changes in reading models, that is, reading on digital platforms as opposed to reading in print in Europe, in the way that they have driven them in the United States and in the UK. To date, to my knowledge, outside of the UK, all of the European countries and a number of other countries as well are still with single-digit market share for ebooks of the book business. Whether that will change, and remember the United States is now around 20%. Whether that will change with changes in pricing remains to be seen. There's also the culture of authorship that I worry a lot about, because we know from psychology or from our own personal behaviors that if something has almost no cost associated with it, we tend to think it doesn't have much value. That if something has a higher cost associated with it, we begin by assuming that it has a higher value. So for those of us who are authors, we care a lot about being perceived as having produced works that really aren't worth much, a couple of cents. You know, when my books are remaindered, I say, so I'm worth $3.95. Moving right along. Okay, and the whole rise of independent publishing and self-published authors is a wonderful thing, but it's going to change in ways I don't pretend to understand the model of traditional publishing. My crystal ball. I am convinced, and not happily so, but I am convinced that academics in universities are going to be assigning shorter and shorter reading, because we want people to do what we assign. And at some point it gets really old when they don't. It is also, and by the way, there's a similar move that is happening in K through 12 with Common Core, as I understand it. Instead of reading whole books, you read sections of books, and then maybe you have a discussion, and maybe there's a video, and you have an art project. And I don't have objections to any of that, but I do have an objection, particularly for a novel, for not reading the whole thing. Okay. We know there are changes in the kinds of things we refer to in the nonfiction that we write. There are a number of studies that have been done that basically say we're not going back to the older journal literature, sometimes because it's not digitized, so it's not easy to find those articles. And what we end up having instead is self-referencing papers, because that's the stuff that we most recently saw on our digital feeds. So that's a whole changing notion of not just scholarship, but knowledge of what we think there is to know about a particular topic because of the things to which we're referring. I am pretty convinced that we're going to have increasing amounts of video and audio in education, at least. And again, that's not bad, but it's changing the notion of the role that print has, or text has, let's put it that way, in what it means to be educated. I believe that cost is absolutely going to continue to drive format, and that will be abundantly clear in the growth of open educational resources, which are just starting to really take off, particularly in public institutions. The University of Maryland in College Park, Maryland is having a lot of use of open educational resources, and I think as we get better and better resources, because some of the textbooks out there are not so good, but as we get better and better resources, I think we will see the textbook publishers having real indigestion. Okay, publishing patterns. I think we're going to have increasing focus on short and summary and serial types of publications. The other thing that I think is going to happen is if we can figure out price models, and the price is low for ebooks, because even with the agency pricing that Amazon is using, they're not that expensive. They're still less expensive than new print. And if we could figure out how to make print less expensive, is the value of the book going to hold? It's not that everybody finishes every book he or she starts, and that was true for print, and it's true for digital. But if the cost continues to drop, do we have even less impetus to care whether we finish reading a book or not? Think of how many times you've started a book, that those first couple of pages really grabbed you, and then you read the next 2 chapters and you said, why am I wasting my time on this? But it's the only book I have, so I'll keep going, and then it gets really good and you're glad you saved it. Are we going to give up sooner because it's throwaway? And I'm hoping there will be a growth in bundled formats. We see some of that. I don't know how much it's going to take off. But I think we need to prepare for surprises, and I'll give you the one that probably surprised me most. I do like to send actual greeting cards, birthday cards, whatever. I don't send a lot of them, but I do send them. But those were going out of fashion, and then e-cards came on and all that sort of stuff. And then I looked up some stats for paper greeting cards. Okay, so annual sales are around 6.5 billion cards, costing more than $7 billion. But how many of you have ever purchased a papyrus card? You looked at how much it cost before you purchased it? No, but you bought it anyway. Okay. People are buying those cards. They're incredibly expensive. And at first I thought, well, they'll only be in special card stores or whatever. And now I'm finding them in my grocery store, and I'm finding them in my CVS, and I'm finding them all over. So who would have thought that people would still be doing that? Heck, finding a mailbox is now really tough for me. But I carry the cards around until I find myself near a mailbox, whatever. People are doing it. Nobody would have thought. Other things in my crystal ball. I'm heartened to see that if you actually bother to ask the students who, for convenience and cost reasons, are going digital, if you bother to ask them what they would prefer if it weren't a money issue and where they think they concentrate best, that they're giving such high marks to print because they're saying, that's where I learn. I didn't ask them what their grades were. There's grade inflation. It doesn't matter anyway. Similarly, Scholastic has been doing studies, and there's a recent study in the UK asking younger kids, do you value print? Do you see yourself as always reading something in print? And the numbers who are saying yes, and I'll just give the American statistics, and these are roughly correct. When the study was done about 2012, 2013, in the 7 through, or maybe it's 6 through 17-year-olds, something like 60% said, yes, I think I'll always read something in print. Now it's up in the most recent study to 65%. Okay, what does this mean? It's hard to judge. You have to look at age cohort and so forth. But it means that it's not just the people who are in college now whose parents had them read print and therefore they still like print. No, it's even younger kids. So we have some challenges. Cost and convenience are definitely going to be drivers of choice. But we have to figure out how to take the language of this conference, what the value proposition of print is, because we know that people, at least at learning stages, that is students, are telling us the things I can do with print that are cognitive that I'm not finding I do as well with digital. So let me close with a family photo. Okay, so yes, that is my son, and yes, that is his wife, and yes, they are on vacation at a beach at an undisclosed location. But the reason, when I saw this posted on my son's Facebook page, I said, I called him up and I said, may I use this photo? He said, sure. But the reason I want to use the photo is he is ordinarily the print guy, and she is ordinarily the digital gal. But they took what was handy, and they are reading on whatever medium happened to be at hand. So it's not as if we have people say, digital or bust, or print or bust. There's far more fluidity now than perhaps we're recognizing, and we might be able to capitalize on. Okay, what about millennials and magazines? These are conjectures. Journals in an academic context, they're going to be overwhelmingly digital. I have no doubt about it. All except the most recent issues in my university library of print have been moved out to storage. I know that's going to be digital. Whether it makes you happy or not, that is a fait accompli, I believe. Magazines reading for pleasure. And this is just my perspective. You guys know a lot more than I do. I think that short articles for people under a certain age, like under 50, are going to be the way to go. I think that reading for diversion is going to be increasingly challenged if you say, but isn't that why you go to the doctor, not just to see the doctor, but to see the magazines? I've made it a practice, every doctor's office I have been in for the last year, to watch what people of different ages are doing while they're waiting. And I haven't seen anybody under the age of, let's call it 30, 35, pick up a magazine, they pick up their phone. Okay. I know you have better terms for this. I didn't know them until I came to this conference. So I just called them destination magazines, by which I mean I really want to get hold of that magazine. I think if you're talking about younger readers in particular, they're going to want it online. And I'm not talking about, where's Sid? Is Sid here? He had the good sense not to come here. If you are a Southern Belle and the daughter of a Southern Belle, you may want to read Southern Living in print. But in the rest of the country, I don't think you're going to pick up, I don't think you're going to go to a place that sells magazines, whatever it happens to be, a newsstand, wherever it's located, and buy magazines if you're under a certain age. The expectation is it's going to be free. I'm going to be able to access it when I want it. The only exceptions, and I went and I checked out my college bookstore before I came just to see what were they selling for magazines. They're the hobby magazines, they're the gendered magazines, and almost nothing else. Okay, comic books and coloring books. Well, you've already talked a lot about coloring books here, so I won't dwell on that. Comic books are making a real comeback, and some of them are digital, that is true. In fact, in Japan, the biggest seller of ebooks is manga comics, digitally. But print comic books are also making a comeback, and I think that's interesting. What do we do when people get tired of adult coloring books? What's that going to do to print sales? Because, boy, did they drive print sales in the last year or two. I don't know. So I guess all the people in this room have to get really creative and think about what the next print, and whether you want to call it a book or you want to call it a magazine, I don't care, but make sure it's in print, might be. So in conclusion, are digital technologies reshaping what it means to read? Potentially, yes, and I say potentially because I'm not a quitter. I think there are things we can do, although I don't yet know what they are. But I worry about loss of concentration. I worry about shortening texts, in part because of loss of concentration, and the expense of printing longer things in print, and the diminution of what is generally known as deep reading, concentrating, focus, thinking about what you're reading. The impact of digital reading on the publishing business. I worry a lot about the textbook business. I think textbooks are being published with all kinds of materials in them that are driving costs up. That doesn't have to happen. We don't need all those color pictures. We don't need all the thing, cartoons are nice, but how about the material? And maybe we could drop the cost of those textbooks to a quarter or so. I think we're going to have to worry about cost, and worry about convenience, and worry about how much time people are willing to spend in reading. But I think the final message that I want to be sure to leave you with is there are more prospects for, let's call it the college-age generation, and probably younger than that, caring about print than at least I knew. Thank you. Thank you so much.
we have time for one question, but Professor Byrne will be going with us to the Delta, so you can ask her as many questions as you want.
Please.
Bo.
About concentration, does your data suggest, and you can only guess,
Yep.
that we'll have less competent doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, engineers because of this lack of ability to concentrate?
Actually, there has been some research done, and I think it is Yale Medical School that is worried incredibly about the group of people going through medical school now feeling I can just look up information. All right, so you talk about concentration, but what is it that a young medical student or young resident most worries about? Do I know the answer to this question? Do I know what dose medication to give? If I'm running a code, what's the third thing I'm supposed to do? So there's been an enormous move away from looking at the patient. Now, that's not exactly the same as concentration, but it means consider the situation you're in. Pause, rather than just look things up, because everybody's carrying a digital device now, whether it's a phone or whether it's a tablet. I mean, they're giving to all the medical students or they're buying them, whatever. So there's a mindset that is shifting, of which concentration is a piece, but thinking when you're in a circumstance and considering what's in front of your nose and mulling it over is another piece of what I worry about being lost. And it's a lifestyle issue.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to chat.
Yeah, we'll have
As
plenty
the-
of time
as
on
the
the
evening
bus.
progresses.
We'll over there, and thank you very much.
Thank you.